Welcome to Diary of Owen. The detail that stayed with me in this story was a strip of blue painter's tape, 6 inches long, pressed across a cardboard box. One name had been written on it in black marker and then carefully covered with a second strip, leaving the box assigned to no one at all. It was such a small action compared with what had happened at the reunion, but that was the moment the future became real. Not when the announcement was made, not when the family applauded, when one person quietly stopped packing for a life that had already been decided without him. Let's go back to the room where that decision was revealed. At 2:17 on Saturday afternoon, the handle of a teaspoon struck the side of a wine glass 3 times. The sound was thin and precise, almost delicate, but it traveled through Bracken Hall with surprising authority. 43 conversations softened at once. Cutlery paused against ceramic plates. A child near the windows stopped dragging a wooden horse across the floorboards. Even the ceiling fan seemed quieter, though they continued turning beneath the whitewashed beams at the same slow speed. I was standing beside the dessert table, holding 2 cups of coffee. The one in my left hand was mine, black, with half a teaspoon of sugar. The one in my right belonged to my girlfriend, Leona. She took hers with milk added first because she insisted it changed the taste. I had never found any evidence that it did, but after 4 years, I could pour the exact amount without looking. Just enough to turn the coffee the color of wet sand. Beyond the open windows, Marin Lake reflected the afternoon light in hard silver fragments. The air had reached 31 degrees, and the old reunion hall had no air conditioning. The back of my linen shirt had begun to stick between my shoulder blades. Someone had placed 3 portable fans near the buffet, but each one merely pushed the warmth from one side of the room to the other. Leona stood beside her grandmother at the front. She had changed since breakfast. That was the first detail that registered as unusual. At 9 that morning, she had been wearing denim shorts and one of my gray shirts over her swimsuit. Now she wore the green wrap dress she had packed for Sunday dinner. Her dark hair had been brushed and pinned loosely at the back of her neck. Around her wrist was the narrow gold bracelet her grandfather had given her when she turned 18. Her grandmother, Celia Vale, held the teaspoon. Celia was 78, 5 feet tall, and capable of silencing a room without raising her voice. The Vale family had been gathering at Bracken Hall on the final weekend of every July for 36 years. There were printed schedules, designated serving teams, color-coded bedroom assignments, and a handwritten rule prohibiting family arguments before breakfast. The rule was ignored annually. Celia tapped the glass one final time and said Leona had something important to share. I looked down at the coffees. Leona had not told me she planned to make an announcement. That alone should not have concerned me. Her family announced everything: pregnancies, engagements, promotions, property purchases, medical results, university admissions. 2 years earlier, her cousin Della had stood in the same place and announced that she had completed a 6-week pottery course. The family had applauded for almost a minute. I assumed Leona was going to tell them about Westmere. We had been preparing to move there since March. Our apartment application had been approved 11 days earlier. The deposit was due the following Thursday. Leona had accepted a position with the Westmere Cultural Trust, overseeing community programs at 3 restored theaters. I had arranged a transfer to the regional planning office of Civic Rail North. We had measured the new apartment from a digital floor plan and decided which wall would hold the bookcase. The move was not a vague aspiration. It had dates, account numbers, reference codes, and a shared spreadsheet with 27 completed tasks. In my profession, a plan does not become real when people speak enthusiastically about it. It becomes real when dependencies begin to lock into place. I designed passenger rail schedules. More specifically, I calculated how trains, crews, platforms, maintenance windows, and passenger connections could occupy the same network without collapsing into one another. Every journey depended on another journey. A 6-minute delay at Havers Junction could become a 23-minute delay in Belcross if the wrong train was held. A maintenance crew unavailable at 4:10 in the morning could affect commuters 12 hours later. People imagined timetables as rows of numbers. I saw them as promises. By the time Leona stood beside her grandmother that afternoon, our move to Westmere contained more than 40 interdependent promises: her employment contract, my transfer, the apartment, the removal company, the cancellation date for our current lease, the weekend her mother had offered to help unpack, the Tuesday appointment at the bank to combine 2 savings accounts into one household account. I expected her to announce that we were leaving Oris on September 14th. Instead, she rested one hand on her grandmother's shoulder and said she had spent the last several months thinking seriously about what she wanted her life to become. The room grew still. I remember the exact shape of her expression. She was smiling, but not in the unguarded way she smiled when she was amused. This was the careful smile she used during presentations, the one that held steady because she had rehearsed the sentences behind it. She said the Vale family had protected Bracken Hall for almost 4 decades. Now the building needed more than annual reunions and temporary repairs. It needed someone willing to remain in Cairnwood County, restore the guest rooms, reopen the kitchen, and transform the property into a permanent lakeside retreat. Her Uncle Bram nodded before she had finished. Her mother covered her mouth with both hands. I stood beside the dessert table with 2 cups of coffee cooling in my grip. Leona said she had made her choice. She was staying. She had signed the preliminary partnership agreement that morning at 10:18. Her grandmother would transfer the operating rights to her at the end of the year. Renovations would begin in October. If everything remained on schedule, Bracken Hall would reopen to paying guests the following May. Then she gestured toward a man standing near the windows. Nolan Vey raised one hand. Nolan had grown up 3 houses away from Leona. They had dated from the age of 17 until they were 23. For 8 months, they had been engaged. I knew this because Leona had told me on our 3rd date. She had not hidden it. She explained that they had grown up mistaking familiarity for compatibility. The engagement ended without scandal. Nolan stayed in Cairnwood County and became a building contractor. Leona left, completed her degree, moved to Oris, and eventually met me in the departure hall of Central Station after she asked whether the delayed 6:40 service was likely to arrive before 7:15. It was not. We spent 40 minutes talking beneath the information board. By the time our train arrived, she had my number written on the back of an unused ticket envelope. At Bracken Hall, Nolan stepped forward while Leona explained that he would supervise the restoration and become a minority operating partner. His company had already completed the structural survey. Financing had been discussed. Local permits were being prepared. The applause began before she finished. Celia embraced her. Leona's mother cried openly. Her uncle crossed the room and shook Nolan's hand with both of his. Someone near the kitchen called for sparkling wine. Leona's younger cousins gathered around her as though she had returned from a war. I remained where I was. The coffee in my right hand had formed a pale skin across the surface. Leona looked at me only after nearly everyone else had reached her. There was an apology in her expression, but there was also expectation. She expected me to come forward. She expected a smile, perhaps an embrace. She expected me to understand that the applause had made the decision permanent. I placed both cups on the dessert table. Then I joined the circle. For the first year of our relationship, Leona and I lived 48 minutes apart. She rented a narrow studio near Oris University. I lived in a converted warehouse on the Eastern Tram line. We saw each other on Wednesday evenings and most weekends. She kept a toothbrush at my apartment but refused to leave clothing because she said that was how accidental cohabitation began. Leona did not like accidental things. She labeled charging cables. She kept digital copies of receipts in folders arranged by month. When she traveled, she photographed the inside of every suitcase before closing it. She believed planning was a form of respect because it prevented your decisions from becoming someone else's emergency. That belief was one of the reasons I loved her. She understood the comfort of knowing what came next. When she moved into my apartment 18 months after we met, we spent an entire Sunday combining our belongings. We had duplicates of nearly everything. 2 kettles, 2 sets of knives, 3 lamps with yellow shades, 4 frying pans, none of them large enough to cook for more than 1 person comfortably. We kept her kettle because it switched itself off more quietly. We kept my knives because I sharpened them. We donated all 3 yellow lamps. That evening, we sat on the kitchen floor eating noodles from the same pot. Leona leaned against my shoulder and said she had always thought sharing a home would feel like losing territory. Instead, she said, it felt as though the walls had moved outward. I remembered that sentence at the reunion. It returned while her relatives filled glasses and Nolan described the condition of the western roof. It returned while Leona stood beside the scale model he had brought, pointing to a proposed dining terrace overlooking the lake. The walls had once moved outward for us. Now she had designed a future in which they closed around me without warning. I did not dislike her family. That distinction mattered. The Vales were loud, interfering, sentimental people, but they were not unkind. They welcomed me before they knew whether I would last. During my first reunion, Celia gave me the task of carving 2 roasted chickens, which I later learned was a test she applied to every new partner. When I produced even slices and did not complain about the blunt knife, she told Leona I could return the following year. Her Uncle Bram sent me photographs whenever he saw a train, even if the train was an ordinary commuter service I had passed hundreds of times. Her mother, Sabine, remembered my birthday and knitted me a scarf so long that I had to wrap it around my neck 3 times. I understood why Leona loved Bracken Hall. The building was imperfect in the way family places are allowed to be imperfect. The floor dipped near the kitchen. The upstairs pipes complained whenever someone used the shower. There were pencil marks inside the pantry recording the heights of children who were now middle-aged. Leona's initials appeared beneath a windowsill where she had carved them with a compass at 14. Every room contained evidence that she had existed before I knew her. During our relationship, she spoke often about preserving the hall. She worried that Celia would eventually sell it because taxes and maintenance were becoming too expensive. She imagined artist retreats, small weddings, winter writing courses, and weekend cooking programs. I had listened. More than that, I had helped. In February, I built a financial model for her after dinner. I created 3 versions based on occupancy rates of 38, 52, and 65%. I estimated seasonal demand using public accommodation data from neighboring counties. I calculated how many weekends the property would need to remain open to cover heating, staffing, insurance, and loan payments. At the time, Leona treated the exercise as a fantasy. She sat beside me at the kitchen table, eating slices of pear and pointing out where I had underestimated linen costs. At 11:06 that night, she closed the laptop and said it was a beautiful idea for another version of her life. I asked whether she wished it were this version. She said no. She said she wanted Westmere. She wanted the theater position. She wanted the apartment with the tall windows. She wanted mornings when we could walk to different offices and meet for dinner afterward. Bracken Hall belonged to her memories, she said, but our life belonged somewhere else. I believed her because Leona had always treated decisions as commitments. In April, when the Westmere Cultural Trust offered her the job, we opened a bottle of wine we had been saving since our 3rd anniversary. We drank it on the balcony while rain struck the metal railing. She rested her feet on my knees and read the offer letter aloud, including the salary, annual leave allowance, pension contribution, and probation period. She began work on September 21st. My transfer had taken longer. Civic Rail North was restructuring its regional planning teams, and there were only 2 positions available in Westmere. I prepared for 3 interviews. I completed a scheduling simulation that involved rerouting 7 services around a fictional bridge closure. On June 12th, at 4:36 in the afternoon, my manager called to confirm the transfer. Leona was in the grocery store. I waited until she came home because I wanted to see her face. She dropped a bag containing 6 peaches and a carton of eggs on the kitchen counter, wrapped both arms around my neck, and held me so tightly that the paper handles tore. We ate one bruised peach over the sink. That was 37 days before the reunion. At no point during those 37 days did she tell me she had reconsidered. At Bracken Hall, the first person to address me directly was Nolan. It was 2:46. I know the time because the clock above the kitchen doors had stopped at 8:22, and I looked at my phone to correct it. Nolan approached, carrying 2 glasses of sparkling wine. He offered me one. I declined. He was 36, 2 years older than Leona and 3 years older than me. He wore tan trousers, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled evenly to his elbows, and work boots that had been cleaned but not polished. There was nothing theatrical about him. No smirk, no triumphant posture. If anything, he appeared uncomfortable. He said he hoped there were no hard feelings. I asked what he believed there might be hard feelings about. His eyes shifted toward Leona. She was speaking with her mother near the scale model. Nolan said the change of plan must be difficult for me. I asked when he had learned there was a change of plan. He rubbed one thumb against the stem of his glass. Then he said they had been discussing the project seriously since early May. The room did not move, but my sense of its dimensions changed. Early May. In early May, Leona and I had spent 4 evenings searching Westmere property listings. We had chosen neighborhoods based on her commute. She had ordered fabric samples for curtains. I had contacted Civic Rail North and formally requested the transfer. While I was arranging our future, she had been designing another one. I asked Nolan whether he knew about Westmere. He said Leona had explained that there were 2 possible directions and that she needed time to determine which life felt right. 2 possible directions. The phrase settled with unusual clarity. In railway planning, a junction is not complicated because it contains 2 possible routes. It becomes complicated when 2 trains are promised the same stretch of track. I asked whether he knew she had accepted a job in Westmere. He did. I asked whether he knew we had secured an apartment. He looked down at his glass. That answer was sufficient. Nolan said he had assumed Leona had spoken to me before the reunion. He said she had told him I was practical and would understand why she needed to make the announcement with the family present. I thanked him for answering. He began to say something else, but Leona called my name. She was smiling too brightly. She crossed the room, took my wrist, and led me through the side doors onto the veranda. I noticed she did not take my hand. Her fingers closed above the joint, as though guiding me through a crowd. Outside, the heat pressed against us. The veranda boards had been painted dark green. The lake lay beyond a sloping lawn where children had abandoned a badminton game. A shuttlecock rested upside down in the grass. Leona released my wrist. She said she knew I was surprised. I said I was. She said she had planned to tell me the previous weekend, but my mother had visited. Then she had planned to explain during the drive to Bracken Hall, but I had spent most of the journey reviewing service changes on my laptop. I told her the drive had lasted 3 hours and 19 minutes. I had used the laptop for 34 of them. She pressed her lips together. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. Accuracy often sounds harsher than anger when someone is hoping to soften the sequence of events. She said she had been afraid I would make her decide before she was ready. I looked through the open doors at her family surrounding the scale model. I asked whether she considered herself ready now. She said yes. I asked when she had decided. She said she signed that morning. But emotionally, she had known for several weeks. Several weeks contained our apartment approval. It contained the transfer contract I had signed. It contained the dinner where we discussed whether to replace our sofa before moving, or wait until we reached Westmere. It contained the Saturday we drove 2 hours to view the apartment and stood in the empty bedroom, deciding which side of the bed would be closest to the window. Leona had chosen the window side. I asked what she expected to happen to us. She looked relieved by the question, as though we had finally reached the portion she had prepared. She said there were options. I could request another transfer, perhaps to the smaller operations office in Belcross. Belcross was 78 minutes from Bracken Hall by car. If I could work remotely several days a week, we might rent a house halfway between the lake and the city. She had already checked. There were places available in Rowan Vale, she said. Nolan knew a landlord who might offer favorable terms. I watched her speak. Her plan had rooms for me, but none had been designed with me present. I asked what would happen if Civic Rail North refused another transfer. She said we could manage long distance for a while. I asked how long a while meant. She said we did not need to determine every detail immediately. That was the first moment I felt something close to panic. It lasted perhaps 4 seconds. My chest tightened. The edge of the veranda seemed excessively bright. I could hear a lawn sprinkler clicking on the neighboring property, each rotation ending with the same metallic knock. Then the feeling passed. Panic is the mind's objection to losing the map. Once I accepted that the map Leona and I had drawn together no longer existed, the physical sensation became easier to contain. I asked why she had announced the decision publicly before telling me privately. She looked back through the doors. Her grandmother was seated now, holding court beside the model. Nolan had opened a folder of architectural drawings. Leona said she needed the family to know she was committed. If she spoke to me first, she said, the conversation might become about our relationship instead of what Bracken Hall needed. I said our relationship was part of what the decision affected. She said she knew. Then she added that she had spent years making choices around other people. This time she had chosen herself. There was no cruelty in her voice. That was what made the sentence difficult to answer. She believed it. She believed choosing herself required excluding me from the decision, but not necessarily from the consequences. In her mind, the future remained available to us. It had merely changed location, occupation, financial structure, and proximity to Nolan. I was expected to adapt because adaptation was one of the qualities she admired in me. She touched my forearm and said I was the person who could make complicated things work. I looked at her hand. For 4 years, that sentence would have felt like love. On the veranda, it felt like an assignment. I told her I needed some air. She said we were already outside. I said I needed more of it. I walked down the veranda steps and followed the path toward the lake. No one stopped me. At the end of the lawn, a narrow wooden jetty extended into the water. The boards were hot through the soles of my shoes. I sat at the far end and rested my forearms on my knees. Across the lake, wooded hills rose through a veil of summer haze. A small electric boat moved near the opposite shore, leaving a white line that widened slowly behind it. I remained there for 31 minutes. I did not use the time to decide whether I loved Leona. I did. That question was not relevant. Love can describe the value of something without determining whether it remains structurally possible. My work had taught me that systems rarely fail because one component is evil. They fail because their dependencies no longer align. A train can be functioning perfectly and still be on the wrong line. A platform can be beautifully maintained and still be unavailable at the necessary time. A crew can be competent, rested, and prepared, yet assigned to a route they never agreed to operate. Leona's choice did not make her a bad person. It made our shared plan false. The distinction allowed me to think clearly. I opened the calendar on my phone. September 5th, removal company confirmation. September 8th, final inspection of our Oris apartment. September 10th, joint banking appointment. September 12th, farewell dinner with friends. September 14th, moving day. September 21, Leona's first day at the Westmere Cultural Trust. October 3, appointment with a financial advisor to discuss buying a home within 18 months. Every event assumed the continued existence of we. The word appeared nowhere on the screen, yet it supported every date. I thought about asking Leona to reconsider. I imagined returning to the hall, taking her aside, and explaining that the apartment deposit was due in 5 days. I could remind her of the transfer I had accepted, the resignation letter she had sent to her current employer, the promises made to landlords and managers. I could make the cost of reversing course feel heavy enough that she hesitated, but that would not restore what had been lost. The injury was not that she had chosen Bracken Hall. The injury was that she believed I belonged in the audience when she revealed the direction of my own life. If I convinced her to choose Westmere, I would spend years wondering whether she had stayed because she wanted our future, or because I had made departure too expensive. I did not want to become a cost she resented. At 3:29, my phone vibrated. Leona had sent a message asking where I was. I answered that I was at the jetty. She replied that her grandmother wanted a photograph before the light changed. I stared at the message. There are moments when the scale of a relationship becomes visible through something absurdly small. 4 years of shared mornings, illnesses, holidays, rent payments, arguments, reconciliations, and whispered conversations in the dark had narrowed into a photograph scheduled around favorable light. I returned to the hall. The family arranged itself on the lawn. Celia sat in the center on a wooden chair. Leona stood behind her with one hand on her shoulder. Nolan stood on Leona's other side, because Bram said the two people saving Bracken Hall belonged together in the picture. No one intended the sentence to hurt me. That made it more honest. I was placed in the second row beside Sabine's husband and a cousin whose name I had forgotten. The photographer used a tripod and set a 10-second timer. We smiled 4 times. In the third photograph, Leona reached behind Nolan and found my hand. Her fingers closed around mine for less than 2 seconds before the camera clicked. Afterward, she asked whether I was all right. I said I would not discuss it in front of her family. She nodded, appearing grateful for my restraint. Dinner began at 6. I sat beside Leona at a table decorated with jars of white flowers. Nolan sat opposite us. The seating plan had been printed before the weekend, so the arrangement was probably coincidental. That knowledge did not make it comfortable. People asked Leona questions about room rates, staffing, marketing, and renovations. She answered with detail. She knew the Western guest wing would contain 9 rooms. She knew the old boathouse would become a sauna. She knew Nolan's crew could begin roof work on October 7th. She knew a local chef named Morel had expressed interest in managing the kitchen. This was not a recent impulse. The project possessed depth. At 6:42, her cousin Ansel asked whether I would be handling transportation for guests. Several people laughed. I smiled because the joke was harmless. Leona said I might help design shuttle connections from Belcross Station. The table turned toward me. I said nothing had been decided. Leona's hand tightened around her fork. Celia looked from her to me. For the first time that afternoon, the room became uncomfortable. Leona said we would work out the details. I folded my napkin once and placed it beside my plate. I said she had worked out a considerable number of details already. Nolan lowered his eyes. Sabine asked whether we needed a private room. I said no. Leona said yes. We left the table through the kitchen and entered a narrow storage room containing folded chairs, cleaning supplies, and 8 crates of mineral water. The overhead bulb produced a faint electrical hum. Leona closed the door. She said I was embarrassing her. I asked which part had been embarrassing. She said my tone suggested she had done something wrong. I said she had allowed her family to assume I was moving to Cairnwood County when we had never discussed it. She said I was being rigid. I looked at the crates stacked against the wall. Each carried a yellow label listing the mineral content of the water in milligrams: calcium, magnesium, sodium. Numbers describing what the bottles contained, whether anyone liked the information or not. I told Leona I was not angry because she wanted Bracken Hall. I was hurt because she had spent months planning 2 futures and had only permitted me to see one of them. She leaned against the door, her expression softened. She said she had not known how to tell me. I said she could have begun with the truth. She said the truth kept changing. I told her the paperwork had been signed at 10:18 that morning. By 2:17, the truth had stopped changing enough for 43 relatives to hear it. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry. She asked what I wanted her to do. It was the wrong question, though I understood why she asked it. She had already done what she wanted. Any answer I gave would require her to choose again, except this time, she would be choosing under the weight of my pain. I did not want a victory produced that way. I said I wanted her to return to dinner. She asked whether I would come with her. I said I would finish the evening. She studied my face. Then she asked the question that revealed more than the announcement had. She asked why I was not fighting for us. I understood then that some part of her had expected resistance. Perhaps she needed it. Perhaps the public announcement was not only a declaration to her family, but a test directed at me. She wanted to see whether I would oppose the force of the Vales, the history of Bracken Hall, the practicality of Nolan, and the emotional weight of her grandmother's approval. She had created a contest and placed our relationship on one side without telling me the rules. I said I did not believe love should require someone to fight against a decision their partner had already signed. She looked away. Then she said she had hoped I would prove we mattered enough. I told her I thought 4 years of planning a life together had already proved that. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The electrical hum continued above us. Finally, Leona opened the door. We returned to dinner separately. I stayed until 9:12. I helped Bram carry folding tables into the storage room. I washed 12 wine glasses because the dishwasher was full. I said goodnight to Celia and thanked her for the weekend. She held my hand longer than usual. Celia had a way of noticing structural weakness in people while pretending she was only being affectionate. She asked whether I would join the family for breakfast. I said I was leaving early. She nodded once. She did not ask why. Leona found me beside our car. The gravel parking area was lit by 2 lamps attached to the hall. Moths moved through the yellow circles. Music drifted from the veranda. An old piano recording her uncle played every year after dinner. Leona asked whether I wanted her to come with me to the guest house. We had been assigned a room in a converted farmhouse half a mile away. I said she should remain with her family. She said they would understand. I told her the evening was important to them. She stepped closer. She asked whether I was ending the relationship. I said I was going to sleep. That answer was not evasive. I was too tired to make a final decision in a gravel parking lot while her cousins danced inside the hall. She searched my expression for anger. I had none available. Grief had occupied the space anger might have used. Leona kissed my cheek. She said we would talk in the morning. I drove to the guest house alone. Our room was on the 2nd floor beneath a sloping roof. The air smelled faintly of dust and lavender detergent. One suitcase lay open on the luggage stand. Leona's clothes occupied the left half. Mine were folded on the right. I showered for 7 minutes. Then I lay on top of the bedspread and listened to insects striking the window screen. At 11:48, Leona sent a message saying the family had opened another bottle of wine and that she would walk back with Nolan and her cousins later. I answered that the side door was unlocked. She arrived at 1:26. I know, because the mattress moved when she sat down, and I saw the green numbers on the bedside clock. She undressed quietly. When she slid beneath the sheet, she left 12 inches between us. Neither of us slept well. At 6:05, I got out of bed. The sky outside was pale gray. Mist covered the fields between the guest house and the lake. I dressed, packed my half of the suitcase, and placed Leona's belongings in the smaller canvas bag we had used for shoes. She watched from the bed. She asked whether I was really leaving before breakfast. I said yes. She sat up, holding the sheet against her chest. Her hair had come loose during the night. Without the green dress and the family gathered around her, she looked like the person I knew. Tired, anxious, and younger than the woman who had signed a business partnership. For a moment, I wanted to return to the bed. I wanted to postpone every decision until familiarity softened the facts. Then she asked whether I could give her a few days to explain the plan properly. The wording brought the distance back. The plan already existed. She was asking for time to make me accept it. I said she did not need my permission to build the life she had chosen. She said that was not what she meant. I lifted my bag. She asked what she was supposed to tell her family. I said she could tell them I had work in Oris. That was true. I left at 6:21. The drive home took 3 hours and 8 minutes, because Sunday traffic had not begun. I did not play music. I kept the windows closed and the air conditioning at 20 degrees. At 7:54, I stopped at a service station near Delro Bridge. I bought coffee and a cheese roll I did not eat. A family of 5 occupied the table beside mine. The father divided a map into sections while the mother distributed juice cartons. Their youngest child slept with his forehead against the glass. I opened my laptop. The first thing I did was not emotional. It was administrative. I reviewed the transfer agreement from Civic Rail North. My position in Westmere began on September 18th. The contract did not depend on Leona's employment or our apartment. The salary increase was modest, but sufficient for me to live alone. Temporary accommodation was available through the company for 12 weeks. I sent an email to the regional director, confirming that I remained committed to the transfer. Then, I opened the Westmere apartment documents. Both names appeared on the application, but the tenancy agreement had not been signed. The holding deposit had been paid from my account. Under the terms, I could request a single-tenant reassessment before Thursday. I wrote to the property manager. I explained that one applicant's circumstances had changed and asked whether I could qualify a loan. At 8:19, I closed the laptop and continued driving. The apartment in Oris was quiet when I arrived. Leona's blue bicycle leaned against the hallway wall. Her shoes were arranged beneath the coat rack in pairs. A list on the refrigerator reminded us to buy packing tape, freezer bags, and light bulbs. I stood in the kitchen for several minutes. Loss rarely announces itself through emptiness. At first, it appears through abundance. Her mug beside mine, her apricot jam in the refrigerator, her handwriting on the shopping list. The cardigan draped over the back of a chair, because she was always cold during breakfast. Everything remained, yet none of it belonged to the future I had believed in the previous morning. I made another cup of coffee. Then I took a notebook from the desk and began listing every commitment that assumed we were continuing together. I did not make the list to punish her. I made it because undefined obligations create damage. At work, when a service is canceled, the worst response is to leave its dependencies active. A driver arrives for a train that will not run. A platform remains reserved while passengers are directed elsewhere. A connecting service waits for people who are never coming. Cancellation must move through the entire system. Our current lease ended on September 30th. I could remain until then or leave earlier. The electricity account was in my name. The internet account was in hers. We shared a savings account containing 18,420 crowns. My contributions totaled 10,800. Hers totaled 7,620. The funds had been intended for moving costs and furniture. We had booked a removal company. We had a joint appointment with the bank. We had purchased train tickets for a November weekend in Selwick. We had reserved a cottage for Christmas near the coast. My emergency contact at work was Leona. Her name appeared as the beneficiary on a small life insurance policy provided by Civic Rail North. None of these arrangements proved love. They were the infrastructure love had built around itself. At 10:03, Leona called. I let the phone ring until it stopped. She called again 4 minutes later. I answered. Behind her voice, I could hear dishes and family conversations. She asked whether I had arrived safely. I said yes. She asked why I had not sent a message. I said I had been working through practical matters. The background noise faded. She had probably stepped outside. She said she wished I had waited. I asked what waiting would have changed. She said we could have driven home together and talked. I told her she had chosen to stay at Bracken Hall. She said only for the night. I looked at the list in my notebook. I said the duration was not the important part. She was silent. Then she told me she loved me. I said I loved her too. The words were true, which made them painful rather than useful. She asked whether that meant we could work through it. I told her love was not the problem. She asked what the problem was. I said she had made a permanent decision about her future, announced it as a completed fact, and then assigned me the task of finding a place inside it. She said she had assumed we would solve the logistics together. I told her logistics were what remained after people agreed on a destination. We had not agreed on one. She said I was reducing our relationship to a timetable. I looked at the notebook. I said no. I was recognizing that I had not been included in hers. Her breathing changed. She asked whether there was someone else. The question surprised me. I said no. She asked whether I had wanted to leave before the reunion. I said no. Then she began to cry. Leona cried quietly. Even in distress, she disliked making sound. I listened to her breathing and watched sunlight move across the kitchen floor. She said she had been terrified that if she told me about Bracken Hall, I would say the plan was unrealistic. She knew I would identify financial risks, staffing problems, seasonal demand, and maintenance costs. She needed to know what she wanted before I turned it into numbers. I reminded her that she had asked me to build those numbers in February. She said that was different. I asked how. She said it had been a dream then. I understood. While the project was imaginary, my analysis had felt supportive. Once the project became possible, the same analysis threatened the emotional certainty she needed. She had not excluded me because I was incapable of helping. She had excluded me because I might have helped honestly. I asked whether she had discussed the risks with Nolan. She said Nolan believed the building could work. I asked whether he had invested money. She hesitated. Then she said he had agreed to contribute labor during the first phase, in exchange for ownership. I wrote the sentence in my notebook. Not because I intended to challenge it, because clarity mattered. I asked whether she and Nolan had resumed their relationship. She said no immediately. I believed her. She said he was committed to Bracken Hall, not to her. I said I understood. She asked why I sounded so calm. I told her calm was not the same as unaffected. She said she needed me to become angry. She needed me to say something emotional so she could understand what was happening. I looked at the refrigerator list. Packing tape, freezer bags, light bulbs. I told her I had imagined waking beside her in Westmere for years. I had imagined walking home across the river after late shifts. I had imagined buying the apartment if the landlord ever offered it. I had imagined her returning from the theaters with programs folded in her bag. I had not treated those images as decoration. I had treated them as my life. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Leona said she had imagined those things too. I said I knew. That was the emotional center of it. She had not lied every time she described our future. She had wanted it while she was describing it. She had simply allowed another future to grow beside it, until one could be selected without warning. She asked what I planned to do. I said I was still determining that. She said she would return that evening. I told her there was no urgency. She said there was urgency for her. I understood, but I did not change my answer. After the call, I separated the financial records. I printed 12 months of statements from the shared savings account and highlighted each contribution. I transferred my 10,800 crowns into my personal account, leaving every unit Leona had deposited, plus the interest earned. I wrote a note in the transfer description explaining the calculation. I canceled the joint banking appointment. I did not cancel the removal company because I still intended to move. At 12:14, the Westmere property manager replied, "Based on my income, I qualified for the apartment alone. The monthly rent would remain the same." I stared at the message longer than necessary. The apartment had 2 bedrooms because one was meant to become Leona's office. Alone, I did not need the space. The rent was manageable but inefficient. I opened the floor plan. The tall windows faced south. The kitchen contained a narrow island. The smaller bedroom measured 3 meters by 2.8. I had imagined Leona's desk beneath that window. I closed the file. Then I searched for smaller apartments in the same district. At 1:06, my manager called. He had seen my email and wanted to confirm I still intended to transfer. I said yes. He told me a furnished studio was available in company housing near Westmere East Station. It would be free for the first 8 weeks. I accepted. The decision took less than a minute. The simplicity unsettled me. I had spent months treating the move as a shared threshold. Once I removed the shared portion, it became an ordinary change of workplace. At 2:30, I began packing. I used the boxes we had collected from the grocery store. The first contained books. I separated mine from Leona's carefully. I did not take volumes I had purchased for her, even when I had read them more often. I left the travel guide to Westmere on the coffee table. The second box contained kitchen equipment. I took my knives, the cast iron pan that had belonged to my father, and the black coffee grinder I owned before we met. I left the quiet kettle. The third box contained records, cables, tools, and the small objects that accumulate in drawers. At 4:52, I found the ticket envelope on which Leona had written her number after our first meeting. I sat on the floor holding it. The paper had softened along the folds. My younger handwriting appeared beneath hers because I had added the date later. October 9th, 4 years earlier. The delayed train arrived at 7:23. We boarded separate carriages and exchanged 6 messages before reaching Oris. I had kept the envelope through 2 apartments. For the first time that day, I cried. There was nothing dramatic in it. I sat between 2 cardboard boxes with one hand covering my eyes, and allowed the grief to pass through me. I cried for the woman who ate bruised peaches over the sink. I cried for the apartment in Westmere we would never share. I cried because Leona had been home to me, and home had become a place where my presence was conditional on my willingness to rearrange myself. At 5:11, the tears stopped. I placed the ticket envelope inside the travel guide and left it on the coffee table. Leona returned at 8:37. I heard her key turn while I was sealing a box in the bedroom. She entered carrying the canvas bag I had packed for her. Her face was pale from the drive. She looked at the boxes in the hallway. Then she closed the door very carefully. She asked what I was doing. I said I was preparing to move. She looked into the living room. Only 6 boxes were packed. Most of the apartment appeared unchanged. Yet she understood immediately. She dropped the canvas bag. She said I had promised not to make a final decision before we talked. I said I had promised to determine what I planned to do. She asked whether this was punishment. I said no. She walked into the bedroom and saw the open wardrobe. My shirts had been removed from the right side. Empty hangers swung slightly on the rail. She asked where I was going. I told her Westmere. Her expression changed. She had expected me to abandon the city because she had abandoned our plan for it. The possibility that I might continue without her had not occurred to her. She asked whether I had taken the apartment. I said I had accepted temporary company housing instead. She sat on the edge of the bed. For several seconds she stared at the carpet. Then she said we did not have to end everything. She could spend part of each week at Bracken Hall and part in Westmere. Nolan could manage construction. Her mother could handle bookings. We could postpone the decision until after the first season. The alternatives arrived rapidly. Each one might have sounded reasonable if offered before the announcement. Now they felt like emergency services dispatched after a route had already been closed. I sat in the chair opposite her. I told her I did not want her to abandon Bracken Hall. She said she would if that was what I needed. I asked whether she wanted to. She looked toward the window. That was the answer. I said I would not become the reason she resented leaving. She said she might resent losing me more. I told her that was possible. She looked at me then, and I saw anger for the first time. She said relationships required compromise. I agreed. She said I was refusing to compromise. I told her compromise happened before a decision, while both people still possessed influence. After one person signed the papers and announced the result, the other person was not being offered compromise. They were being offered compliance. She stood. She said I made everything sound clean when it was not clean. I agreed again. Nothing about the room felt clean. Her cardigan remained on the chair. Our photograph from Selwick stood on the dresser. The bed where we had slept beside each other for 3 years was still unmade. I said the situation was painful, but the decision itself was clear. She asked whether I could truly leave after one mistake. I told her the mistake was not choosing Bracken Hall. It was choosing a future that affected both of us, while deliberately keeping me outside the room. She said she had been afraid. I said I knew. She said, fear made people do stupid things. I said it did. She asked why understanding her did not make me stay. I thought about that. Then I told her understanding explained what happened. It did not undo it. Leona sat again. The anger left her as quickly as it came. She asked whether I had ever intended to marry her. The question struck me more deeply than anything else she had said. I told her yes. I had planned to propose in November during the Selwick trip. I had not purchased a ring, but I had visited 2 jewelers. I had written her ring size in the password-protected notes on my phone because she had once tried on her cousin's ring and mentioned the measurement. Leona lowered her head. I told her because withholding it would have turned the proposal into a hidden weapon. I did not want to use an unwritten future to make her feel guilty. She asked why I had not proposed earlier. I said I thought we were moving toward the same life and did not know there was a deadline. She pressed both hands against her face. We remained in the bedroom until the light outside became blue. At 10:02, she asked where I would sleep. I said the sofa. She said I could use the bed. I told her I preferred the sofa. Neither option held dignity. They were simply available surfaces. On Monday morning, I went to work. I reviewed a revised autumn timetable for the Belcross corridor. 2 services needed to exchange platforms because engineering work had reduced capacity near the river tunnel. I spent 3 hours adjusting arrival intervals by increments of 2 and 3 minutes. The work steadied me. A functioning schedule does not require every train to reach its original destination. It requires changes to be acknowledged early enough that passengers are not left waiting for a service that no longer exists. At lunch, I updated my emergency contact. I changed it from Leona to my older sister, Mira. I removed Leona as the beneficiary on the company policy and replaced her with Mira's 2 children. I did not tell Leona I had done this. The actions were not messages, they were maintenance. That evening, we divided the apartment. We moved slowly. Leona kept the sofa because she had paid more toward it. I kept the dining table because it had belonged to my parents. She kept the framed prints. I kept the floor lamp beside the bookcase. When we reached the kitchen, she touched the quiet kettle and asked whether I wanted it. I said no. She almost smiled. Then she said I had always preferred it. I told her preference was not ownership. The sentence hurt us both. On Tuesday, she returned to Bracken Hall to meet Nolan and an accountant. Before leaving, she stood in the hallway wearing the same green dress from the announcement. She had a folder under one arm. She said she would be back Thursday evening. I said all right. She waited. I think she expected me to ask about the meeting, the financing, or the renovation schedule. For months, I had been the person she consulted whenever a project became complicated. I did not ask. She opened the door, then turned back. She said removing myself would not make her choice easier. I told her I was not trying to make it easier. She asked what I was trying to do. I said I was respecting it. She left without answering. The property manager allowed me to end our current lease early, provided Leona applied to retain it alone. She did. Her work in Oris continued until December, and she needed somewhere to stay during the transition. I scheduled the removal company for September 9th, 4 days earlier than originally planned. I canceled the Selwick tickets and the Christmas cottage. Both companies returned partial refunds. I divided the money according to our original contributions and transferred Leona's share. Every cancellation produced an automated confirmation. Your booking has been updated. Your reservation is no longer active. The selected passenger has been removed. The language was impersonal, almost gentle. During the following 3 weeks, Leona and I behaved like considerate strangers sharing a waiting room. We did not argue. She attended meetings at Bracken Hall. I prepared for Westmere. We ate separately, but occasionally occupied the kitchen at the same time. One Wednesday, she cooked too much pasta and placed a bowl beside my laptop. I thanked her. On Friday, I repaired the loose chain on her bicycle because I had the correct tool. She thanked me. These gestures did not mean we were reconsidering. They meant the relationship had contained real care, and care does not evaporate at the exact moment trust is damaged. On August 19, Leona asked whether I would meet her at a cafe near Oris Central. We sat at a table overlooking the platforms. She had brought a notebook. For an hour, she described a possible arrangement. I would live in Westmere during the week. She would divide her time between Oris and Bracken Hall until December. After that, she could take the Friday evening train to Westmere and return Sunday night. During the summer season, I could visit the hall. During winter, she could spend longer periods with me. She had calculated travel times. She had researched ticket prices. She had even listed the holidays when Bracken Hall would close. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, she placed both hands around her cup and asked whether the plan could work. I looked through the glass wall at Platform 6. A train waited with its doors open. Passengers boarded in small groups, carrying shopping bags and suitcases. I said the plan was operationally possible. Hope appeared in her face. Then I said possible was not the same as wanted. She looked down. I told her I did not want a relationship organized around recovering from a decision I had been deliberately excluded from. I did not want every visit to become evidence that I was flexible enough. I did not want Nolan's presence to become a subject we pretended did not matter. I did not want her to travel 3 hours each weekend out of guilt while I counted the minutes as proof that she still loved me. She said Nolan was not a romantic threat. I told her I believed that. The threat was not Nolan. The threat was the version of our relationship in which decisions were made privately and presented publicly, while I was praised for adapting afterward. Leona closed the notebook. She said she did not know how to repair that. I said neither did I. She asked whether I might know later. I watched the train leave Platform 6. The doors closed. The rear lights moved beneath the station roof and disappeared around the curve. I told her I could not ask her to wait for an answer. I did not expect to change. She nodded. That was the moment our relationship ended. There was no dramatic sentence, no accusation, no final embrace beneath the departure board. We finished our coffee because leaving it untouched would have felt wasteful. Then we walked to the station entrance. Leona said she hoped Westmere became everything we had imagined. I told her I hoped Bracken Hall did too. She asked whether we could speak again someday. I said someday was too large a word to promise. She accepted that. We stood facing each other for several seconds. Then she kissed my cheek, as she had in the parking area after the reunion. This time, neither of us pretended it meant we would talk in the morning. September 9 arrived warm and clear. The removal van came at 7:40. 2 men carried my boxes down the stairs, while Leona stood in the kitchen wearing a blue robe. Her workday did not begin until 10. By then, most of her belongings had already been moved to Bracken Hall. The apartment looked unfamiliar. Pale rectangles marked the walls where pictures had hung. Dust had collected beneath the sofa. The rooms echoed. The final box contained my bedding and the lamp from beside the bookcase. I sealed it with blue painter's tape because we had used the last of the brown packing tape. I wrote Westmere Studio across the top. For several seconds, I stared at the words. Originally, every box had been labeled with one of 3 categories: his, hers, shared. We had written them together in black marker during an evening in June. The box beside me still carried the word shared beneath the fresh strip of tape. I pulled another 6 inches from the roll and placed it carefully over the old label. Leona watched from the doorway. She asked whether I needed help carrying anything. I said the movers had everything. She nodded. I placed my apartment key on the kitchen counter. Beside it lay the quiet kettle, a jar of apricot jam, and the travel guide to Westmere. The ticket envelope was still inside. Leona had found it, but she had not removed it. I put on my jacket. She followed me into the hallway. At the door, she said she was sorry. I told her I knew. She said she had never wanted to remove me from her life. I looked back at the apartment we had shared. I said she had not removed me. She had chosen where her future would go. I was simply no longer placing myself inside it. The movers waited below. I walked down the stairs. At 8:18, the van pulled away from the building. I followed in my car, carrying 1 suitcase and the cast iron pan on the back seat. The road to Westmere ran west, through fields already beginning to yellow at the edges. I stopped once for fuel and arrived shortly after noon. My temporary studio was on the 5th floor of a narrow brick building beside East Station. It contained 1 bed, a desk, 2 chairs, and a kitchen, small enough that I could reach the sink from the refrigerator without taking a full step. I unpacked the coffee grinder. I placed my father's pan in the lower cabinet. Then, I opened the window. Below me, the station platforms extended beneath a roof of steel and glass. An afternoon service was preparing to depart. Doors opened and closed. A conductor checked the length of the platform before raising one hand. At 1:03, the train began moving. For several seconds, each carriage passed through the reflection of my open window. Then the final carriage cleared the platform, and the empty rails shone quietly in the sun.